If I'm looking everywhere, forgive me. I wanted to talk about a new topic. New topic, yes. Um, what is it called? I wanted to talk about tragedy. I have to admit, I don't know what I want to say yet. I've just been sitting here thinking as I procrastinate on the work I'm supposed to be doing. Um, I am currently watching Glee. Really fantastic series. Back when I watched it when I was a kid, and now that I am an adult, uh, honestly, fantastic series. Um, and they have a lot of episodes, and I think this is common these days, where they target issues like diversity, inclusion, and all those things. And the thing I think I liked about Glee very much is that it was very, very much told from the point of view of children who are from the outside, kids who didn't belong in a place where they should have belonged because of something that they identify with. So either it's a gender issue, sexuality, or things which you can't even do anything about, like body size. And so it's pretty riveting looking at their stories individually, and how they find each other and they find themselves, and they embrace what they have that is theirs instead of trying to be like everybody else, and how they define their own path. Because I think that's mostly the track for Glee, where they just kind of like they power through all the insults, and the letdowns and the put downs, and they pursue this one singular thing that they want. Well, not one singular. They have all of them have like different motivations for different things, and so they pursue all those things, regardless of all these things that are happening around them, and that's really beautiful. But I am African. I am Kenyan, right? And so like the stories that you're going to see or you're going to read about, or the stories that are very, very close to home, are those these days, but aren't those also? Um, it's way too easy to hear about people who die of poverty, or I don't know, crime activity, and these things happen everywhere really, except just like poverty, I guess, or wars, like what happened with Sudan a while back, and all those things. Um, and I was wondering why, and I was, because I'm watching this right now, and I was like, man, the message of inclusivity and diversity is a message that has permeated every bit of like the social fabric, mostly of Western societies, and even here, by the way, you know, the younger people in society are starting to embrace those ideas as necessary ideas, or as building blocks for other social and professional interactions people have within each other, not within, with each other. And I'm like, yo, that's a lot of influence, that's a lot of power. People just kind of consistently talking about the same thing, to the point where everybody is towing a line that is now an assumptive obvious, the same way like individual free will is is an assumed inherent truth, right? I don't even need to explain the fact that my freedom is it mutually exclusive to yours? Something of the sort, right? And they don't tangle. Like your freedom as an individual should not in any way tamper with my freedom, regardless of your status, your social status, your wealth, all those things. These are not things that when there's a clash we sit down to discuss. These are things that when there's a clash we automatically point to the golden rule, and parties who are involved immediately follow the golden rule through. So I have tampered with your freedom, therefore some negative consequence should find me, or something of this one. Same thing now with like diversity, inclusion, and all those things. But now more than ever, we have so much information about what's happening in the world. We know about so many things that afflict so many people who are either around us or not around us. And I feel like if you're in a third world country, and then Africa is special because Africa is a continent largely made up of third world countries. I don't know if there's any other continent that's the same. Maybe Asia. I can't remember really. But when you're dealing with so many, like a continent, so many countries that are third world countries, then every election is a dramatic occurrence. Issues of poverty, issues of illiteracy are common. There's so many evils. I'm going to call them evils, although that's not the right term to use. But there's so many evils that are like everywhere. So many countries afflicting so many people. Yet, an issue that deals with identity causes a much severe reaction for people than an issue that is literally life and death. And so, like, in my head, I start thinking, why? Like, why is it that if I say the N-word right now, your reaction will be more, guttural than if somebody makes a joke about, like, poor people? Because that's the current, I think, state of affairs online. People are very politically correct, but the topics that they're politically correct, also pretty compressed. They're actually topics right now where you can make some jokes and people will be offended, but you're not going to get a flood of hate messages in your inbox. Right? People will not give you an assumptive identity, like hate or for people or whatever. And more than that, I'd say, is people have put in a lot of energy online and offline to counter the effects for the prejudices against identity, right? And there's a lot of effort by they put towards elevating things like poverty and illiteracy. Like, these aren't things that are just in the black. Like, if you do a bit of research, governments play a part, NGOs play a part, there are local communal projects that play a part towards elevating all these things. Like, I know there's a project in a place called Turkana. I was very, very lucky to find this lady who had taken a couple of kids, and she put them through some art program where they create paintings and they create music, and she'd take it and she'd brand it, and then she'd, Turkana is very far from Nairobi, and so she'd bring them back to Nairobi, and they'd perform and they'd make work and they'd release it and all these things, and it garnered them money. I also know like another community in Kasarani with refugees. Again, very lucky. I found this. A friend of mine called Caitlin is the one who pointed me to them. Guys who are refugees who've come to Kenya. Massively hard to find a job, but what they do is they come together, they make music, and they point each other to places where they can be paid to do music. And most of these places are churches, and they're not getting much. They're getting maybe 2,000, 3,000 shillings. That's maybe $20, $30 every Sunday a performance, something of the sort. And that may even be on the higher end, because churches actually should not be paying, or most churches don't pay. They don't like salary people who do what, who play like on Sundays. Like, you guys aren't on a salary, you guys are within a ministry, so you guys are volunteers in a way. Anyways, they banded together and they found a way to live off their music. And so it's not like there's nothing happening within the communities, but there's a large vacancy compared to other like issues related to identity. There's a large vacancy for how deeply people care about these issues. Right now, a person will be literally more emotionally disturbed with somebody saying a racial slur than somebody dying from starvation, right? One, even because of social pressure, happens even lesser, I feel, than the other one, which happens a lot more in a lot more countries. And I wanted to know why, and I had I think 3 explanations. The first one is I feel like we all are teaching each other what we should care about just by repeating, phrases or stories continually. So all of us are echoing the same story. Something happens to someone, they tweet it out, we all retweet the story, we all write blogs about it, we all have videos about it, and so slowly by slowly, it's an issue, whatever issue it is, the importance of the issue gets mucho blown out of proportion, way more than it ideally should, or maybe as much as it should, because the changes are very tangible these days, right? The changes they're not only online changes, these are things that change on the ground. So it's actually not correct to say, I can't remember that train of thought. Anyway, so that's my first explanation. But then that's something that could happen with every topic that insists on a necessitation of empathy from a person. So if I abuse you, if I show hate to you, then if empathy comes from a third person, that makes sense. But also if you're going through a massively disturbing or troubling ordeal like starvation, for example, that also elicits a lot of empathy. But right now there isn't as much empathy with those kinds of scenarios, with scenarios dealing with racially based hate, right? And mostly towards minorities. The inverse is actually not there yet. So if I abuse a majority, that's actually currently within what social allowable limits. I don't know how to phrase that pretty well, but something of the sort. I'm allowed to abuse a white person, right? Socially allowed. But the second one is the one I think which matters the most, and which is the places where we have these discussions and these debates, the places which really drive these discussion and debates, they are mostly Western based, right? So a lot of the online petitions and debates and all those things have happened on Facebook and on Twitter and on Reddit and all those platforms. And all those platforms are, I think most of them are actually from the US directly. And the US is a first world country. And when you have countries like those, even though you'll have instances of poverty, instances of very high crime rates, and US has some, in some states the crime rates is insane. So you can't really say, oh my god, everybody's living in London or whatever, this is Sweden and whatever. They have their own influx of bad things and good things that happen. But I think, again, the people who are online, the people who control the discussions, again, aren't those people who are afflicted. Generally, the people who are online creating narratives and all those things are people like me, people who can afford to live a certain lifestyle without thinking about it, without thinking about the fact that something as basic as eating food and having shelter is something to think about. I personally make music and I post it online every once in a while. I don't really worry much about rent or food. I haven't had the need to worry about it for a very, very long time, because it's always kind of found itself. If I want a job, I can probably find it. Before that, I had, well, not with the rent for this place and everything, but before I moved out, I was with my parents and they supported me enough for me to be comfortable enough to do whatever I wanted to do, ideally. Do most of what I wanted to do. So, not that we were rich, but I was well enough to have time to just post jokes on Facebook. And I think those are the people who are driving most of the conversations or participating in most of the conversations. Most of these social media sites and such, like Facebook, Instagram, the people who populate it with content are usually a great minority of the people on the platform. So I forget what the rule is called, Pareto's principle, I think, but it's around 20% of people who frequent Facebook who create most of the content that's on Facebook, so around 80%. And so if you think about that, that's like 20% of the people who frequent these media sites. Then the ones who now create trending discussions or debates or content and all those types of things, the number narrows down greatly. And most likely all those people look like me, or the incidence is very current or trending or shocking, right? But a lot of the times I suspect that it'll be people like us, people who have time to sit down and watch YouTube video after YouTube video after YouTube video with no consequence of the loss of time or effort, because most likely when the month comes, all their bills are paid somehow, right? It's something you worry about, you don't worry about, but it's something that's there, like in the back of your head. Most likely things will be okay. You're not trapped, you know. And so I feel like those are the type of people who create so much content online, and they are people who will never really empathize with some of the greater evils happening because they've never really gone through them, right? So it's very, very hard for me. I can empathize with somebody who's starving. It's very, very hard for me to continually empathize with a person who's starving. I'm not really at that space, and my life is constantly moving. It's a lot more easier for me to empathize with a person who maybe talks about stress, because maybe I am also in a position where stress is a consistent factor, or a consistent, what do they call it? Well, a consistent problem that I have. And just because problems have different, I'd say, depths, doesn't really negate any problem any person has, right? Any deviation from optimality, I'd say, is something that you should ideally address, right? If you don't feel like you're happy enough or well enough or worthy enough, and that's something that you want to change, then that's something that's worthy of change. We should not take that away from you. But it's a lot easier for us to empathize with people who have problems that are similar to us. And mostly these days, when it's so easy for us to blow a story up with such little effort. I see a story about stress, all I need to do is retweet. I retweet it, my 15 people see it, and just one person there maybe has 1,000 followers. He retweets it, and then maybe 100 see it. So it's so easy for us to push stories, and the stories that are relevant to us may not be stories that are connected to what I would term as great evils, like wars or suffering. Because if you're going through a war, you're probably not on social media, most likely. You need somebody else to post about it. The people who are posting about it are most likely in their houses. They get shocked, they get traumatized, they wake up the next morning, they have to go to work and do whatever they do. Whatever shock they have is like, doesn't last too long. I mean, that, and plus the fact that we're so desensitized from things, people really don't have the energy or the interest or the empathy, the necessary empathy to properly empathize with people who have gone through like great evils, wars, hunger, those types of things. Some evils that are very, very great, however, do stream into our types of our lives, ideally, right? So I might never really starve, we say, and this doesn't count people who fast or people who have gone hungry 2 or 3 days, because that actually happens. But things such as rape, for example, now that you can find it being prevalent within the middle class people, let's say, middle class maybe going upward, and so that becomes a problem that kind of seeps into the daily life of people who create and push stories that propagate online, maybe on radio and on TV, and within like what do I say, like current or trending topics within a certain region or whatever. So those stories can still be picked up by people like us and pushed by people like us, and out of a lot of empathy and out of a need to create change, and the issue merits the time and effort, or even more time and effort than whatever we put into pushing a story forward, or sending a donation of like $10 or whatever, like 1,000 shillings or whatever. But a lot of things which happen to even with rape, there's a bubble of people who might share it in a bubble, who might find it hard to empathize with those stories, and like they come at it from a critical angle before anything else. Not that that's actually wrong. For some of it might be. It's just a show of how small differences between people foster such different opinions about a story, whether people care about it or not. So like I'd say, like there are evils which are great, which people like us can bear with: political ones, social ones, violent ones, rape, maybe a serial killer who's on the loose currently, I don't know, whatever. So those are two, I think. So the tastemakers of the internet are well off, ideally. Like you could be very, 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 like you could have no money in a bank account. You don't know where rent is gonna come from, etc., etc. But you're not really stuck. But I could be wrong. And also, I'm not like counting everybody as one general like color. It's just, if you have the time to enter YouTube and just like goof around, you have the resources to do that, and you ideally do not have the worry that in future you might not be able to do that because your attention might go into like finding food and finding shelter. The weird thing about this is, I think I had the third point and I can't remember, so I'll actually end it here. Like this will be like a conclusion. The weird thing is, some of the evils that we usually handle, or some of the evils that I've talked about, the people who are currently in it, they just can't talk about it. So that's the first thing. If I'm in a war, I'm probably not going to be on a social media platform. But the second thing, and the very important thing, is we have proven that we can reshape people's moral judgments towards certain issues through online debates, just by the fact that a lot of people demand that some moral, what's this thing called? I can't remember what the phrase is, but we have proven that if I, for example, posit a statement and I say, for example, if you let people die hungry within your country, then you're immoral, something of the sort. Just having a large number of people backing that statement is enough to change this one person's view, right? To make that statement seem as if it's inherently true, right? That there shouldn't even be a discussion around whether the statement is true or not. And that shapes behaviors offline. So like that makes people, for example, participate more, a lot more in places where there's need for participation in regards to, so like with maybe issues of like diversity, inclusion, and race and gender and all those things, and sexuality. Like we've seen that change. We've seen this discussion being held online for years, and now like there being like real world changes to it. And what I'm thinking is, if we can do the same thing for issues of like grave issues that are literally life and death for some people in this world. So like people who, like, if we don't do something today, they die today, hospitals being understaffed in some areas, going through famine. Like you could have one, like Kenya is one of those countries where like there's a region where people will die like in the millions because of starvation. And in the same country, there's a place where somebody's being paid like 18 million shillings, which is like something like what's that, like 100,000 a month, something of the sort. And that happens again everywhere with its own like degree, uh, the difference of degrees more than anything else. But it's still pretty stupid, right? I mean, if we can if we can force people, even if it's in pretense, they don't believe it, but they need to do it because the social, the current social truth is this premise is true and all of us must follow it. So now it's like, for example, if you don't try and balance out, for example, your employees like between male and women, this is something that maybe before nobody even really thought about it that much, but now if you don't, that's an actual issue, right? That that's something that your customers can look at as negative, that your employees can look at as something that is undesirable within the company. Like that's something that an employee can use. That's information an employee can use to quit and work for somebody else, because there's a lot more meaning there, because there's a lot more diversity there. And so I wonder if we can do the same thing for issues like poverty, even if it's within countries, because no matter how big a problem is, you can most probably detail it out and find a place where you can just fit yourselves and find a way to fit many people into one problem so that the problem is, slowly mitigated, right? It would be cool to see online campaigns that are as bold and as wide spanning about issues that I feel really, 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 truly matter. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. I feel like if we had discussions on like topics on how people can participate in their democratic processes to keep the countries peaceful, to keep the countries accountable, for example, because that's a funny thing about having a society that's very well educated. A lot of people actually know what to do, a lot of people do not know what to do. Some people want to do something, some people don't know what to do, but we've finally had a platform where, for example, like with before, like companies used to get away with so much, and these days it's very hard to, because even a person who doesn't really understand how the processes work understands that I just need to either not buy a company's product or tell somebody else not to buy their product, and that can get their attention and change the decisions they're making inwardly. And I'm wondering if we can't do the same thing for our governments, for people who maybe lobby against the government, like people who protest against the government, if they can educate everybody else on how to do it successfully together, on like effective ways of countering very complex issues like poverty within countries, like how starvation happens, for example, because you already kind of know, like just giving people money, giving people food, that's not enough. You've kind of ensured their survival now, but not tomorrow. So much can change when these issues matter more than issues of identity. But then I understand why the issues of identity matter as much as they do on social media and on the things I watch on Netflix and YouTube and all those things. It's because the people who are creating this content and the people who are watching this content are in a place where identity is a major problem that they need to deal with. And so it easily resonates with them. It's something that's easy for them to consume and then perpetuate. But then I feel like maybe that shows how malleable we are in how we consume things online, right? That we only want to interact with things that we kind of resonate with first, and maybe how much we don't really behave out of our humanity, and how we maybe behave just to mimic others, just to belong, to have a feeling of like a sense of belonging online, and it's not really governed by like actual humanity, like actual need to actually connection to like humanity. I'm finding it hard to find how to phrase that, but I feel like I've communicated. I can't really say I've done much or have, you know, I don't think I can say like I've walked the rope that I've described, but I plan to. Um, I'm really hopeful about the future. If I make anything of myself, that those are the places that I'd like to participate in. Homelessness and poverty, like elevating those problems. I really feel like those are the places where uh, like it is important for as many people to be involved as possible, rather than us fighting over issues of identity, because that clearly shows we have enough resources to give to the people who clearly um, aren't in a place where they can fight for themselves. So that's what I think about that issue. Um, Maybe it's contentious. Maybe this is contentious. I don't really know. What I do know is this is long. It's now 30 seconds. So I actually want it to be 31 seconds exactly. That will make me very happy. Bye bye.